give your attention to this short but very entertaining video.
Thank you. Just one moment.
Tasty pencil.
Due to COVID-19, this meeting will be conducted as a Zoom meeting pursuant to the provisions of Assembly Bill 361, which suspends certain requirements of the Brown Act. This meeting is being live streamed on the CCTA website. The chair will call upon members, staff, and other speakers by name. Please speak clearly and state your name before giving comments or remarks. Persons participating via Zoom with their cameras enabled are reminded that their activities are visible to viewers. Members participating by Zoom wishing to speak should physically raise their hand and unmute their mic when called upon. Members should mute their mics when done speaking. Citizens participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the Raise Hand feature or dial *9 if participating via phone, and the chair or staff will call upon them at the appropriate time. Citizens will have 3 minutes to speak. After 3 minutes, staff will lower their hand and mute their mic. Participants via phone will be called upon by the last 4 digits of their phone number. It is requested that public speakers state their names and organization, but providing such information is voluntary. Written public comments received in accordance with the teleconferencing special notice for public comment guidelines are printed on the meeting agenda. If authors of the written correspondence would like to speak, they should raise their hand and the chair will call upon them at the appropriate time. All written correspondence received after that and during the meeting will be entered into the record. A roll call vote will be taken for all action items. Thank you for participating in a meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority.
Great. So we're going to have Jackie do an official roll call. So when she calls your name, just indicate that you are present.
Okay, bear with me. There's a few names here. So I have Mika McFadden for Anderson.
Actually going to be Rob Thompson for
Rob. Okay, thank you, Member Rob. Committee Member Burgess. Committee Member Geringer.
Here.
Committee Member Haskew.
Here.
Committee Member Howell. Committee Member Howell. Committee Member Hudson.
Still here, even unmuted.
Thank you. Committee Member Hirsch. Committee Member Craig. Committee Member McCrary.
Here.
Thank you. Committee Member McWee.
Here.
Thank you. Committee Member Mitchoff.
Here.
Thank you. Committee Member Kamara.
Here.
Thank you. Committee Member Toth.
Here.
Thank you. Committee Member Levin.
Here.
Thank you. Committee Member Xavier.
Here.
Thank you. Okay. So we have Committee Member Burgess absent, Committee Member Howell absent, Committee Member Hirsch absent, and Committee Member Craig absent. And we do have a quorum.
Great, thank you, Jackie. I wanted to take a minute and have some people do some introductions. Takes a while to go around the whole room. And I think during the course of this meeting, we're going to get to meet each other. But I did just want to give an opportunity. I'm going off script here, so bear with me, Jackie. I wanted to give an opportunity for 3 folks to kind of introduce themselves and say a few words. The development of the Accessible Transportation Strategic Plan was a partnership between Contra Costa County and CCTA. And we have representatives appointed to this task committee from both CCTA and Contra Costa County. So I wanted to give both of them a chance to maybe say a few words and introduce themselves. I also wanted to give our executive director, Tim Hale, an opportunity to welcome you all to the task force and give a few brief remarks. So Tim, why don't you kick it off first, and then we can go to committee member, or actually Chair Geringer, since she's the chair of CCTA, and Supervisor Mitchoff after that.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I really appreciate it. So as Peter mentioned, my name is Tim Hale. I'm the Executive Director of Contra Transportation Authority, and really appreciate your commitment to this task force and really bringing a more convenient, accessible transportation service to Contra Costa County. I think we're obviously all here for the same reasons, the same priorities. And as you all know, this is a tremendous priority for CCTA as well as the county. And that's why we formed our partnership around this. And I think we all realize that there's a tremendous amount of need for, just more convenient, accessible transportation in our county. Just everything right now is being operated in silos, right? Between the agencies, the cities, the nonprofit organizations. And so we really need to really improve people's quality of life. And I think that what was interesting is I started learning, I don't know if you know a little bit about me, I'm actually kind of a transplant here to Contra Costa County in 2017. And when I started learning about really the gaps and the needs that we have for better accessible transportation, I was really excited for CCTA to really take on this accessible transportation strategic plan in partnership with the county. And I think we're really focused on, how to make it safer, how to get more drivers, more volunteer programs, how to get better access to our medical facilities. And I think more importantly, I think we're all trying to work together to find, the right entity to kind of take this on and really implement it, and also find new funding sources to really make this all happen. And so I think CCTA is, the authority board, and you're going to be hearing from the chair of our authority board, Teresa Geringer. This is a really important priority for CCTA and the board of CCTA and for our staff. And we're really excited to really get this to moving forward. And really, again, really appreciate your time in this and really trying to make this come to fruition and moving it forward.
So first of all, Tim, thank you. I think you said almost everything that that needs to be said. So I am Teresa Geringer, and I'm honored to be chair of the authority board this year, but very honored to be having this kickoff, the task force work kickoff, so that we can continue to move forward the work that the group did before. And I'm really bad at acronyms and all of that, but the pack that worked on getting the plan to this point, and now we have the opportunity to really look at how we implement and how we move forward. And I think that looking around at the boxes on the screen, I don't know all of you, but I think that we have the right people here, and I know we'll discuss in a little bit who might be missing and who else we need to have join us to make this a reality. So thank you all for being here.
And hi, I'm Supervisor Karen Mitchoff, representing the 4th District, but I serve with Supervisor Glover on CCTA and actively sought out this appointment, as I know most of you did in your respective agencies. Like Teresa, I don't know some of you, but I know more of you than I don't know. So that's a good thing. And I look forward to getting to know you better and working with you. I feel passionate about this. As many of you may know, I'm going into my last year of public service and will be retiring in December of 2020. Well, it's actually January 3rd, 2023. but I've committed to working with you and CCTA staff to make sure that this no longer sits on a shelf, and to honor the work of all of you who have worked on this so hard, and especially staff Peter Engel and John Cunningham. And again, thank you to Tim Hale for joining. I see Nicole Howell has joined us. She's on mute, but Jackie, if you can show her as being in attendance. So I think we're all passionate about this, and we want to see something concrete happen. And so I know, along with Supervisor Burgess, who's not on yet, she may be, but wasn't maybe not able to do this. She and I have talked about this, and to the extent that the Board of Supervisors can lend its weight, if you will, we're going to, my current CSAC, California State Association of Counties president, his motto is get stuff done. But you can put the STUFF and put a 4-letter word in there, which he often uses. And I see smiles around the way, the Zoom. That's my motto for this next year. Thank you.
Real quick, I would also like to note Committee Member Craig is now here as well. Thank you.
And if I could just, in my daytime role, Supervisor Burgess is not going to be able to attend today, and definitely send her regrets. I know that Manny, her scheduler called ahead of time, but just so everyone here knows that she's here in spirit, and will be working alongside everyone.
Well, and Teresa, that just means you've got 2 hats on today.
I will be debriefing. That is correct.
And we know you will do that very well.
Yeah, well, thank you all. Rather than do introductions with the whole group, we have an item later, 5E, I believe, which everybody will have an opportunity to kind of give their perspective and tell us all a little bit about themselves, so that we can get to know each other a little bit. Let's move into public comment. Jackie, have we received any written public comment?
We did not receive any public comment.
Okay. Does anybody on the committee have a comment, or anybody in the audience have any comments of items that are not on today's agenda? I don't see any hands raised. Jackie, do you see any hands raised?
No, I do not.
Okay, let's close the public comment and go on to item 4, election of a chair and vice chair for the task force. I'd like to open up for nominations. If you want to nominate a chair and or a vice chair, now would be the time to do it. I see a hand from Luella Haskew, Committee Member Haskew.
For their passion for the particular goal of this task force and for all the work they've done, I nominate Karen Mitchoff as chair and Teresa Geringer as vice chair.
Second, as promised.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Debbie, do you have a nomination?
Well, you could have come to me first, because I had my hand up before Luella had her hand up. I'm not an elected official, so it doesn't go like that. But yes, I 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th.
Okay, do we have any other nominations? I don't see any hands. So I think what we'll do, we have to take a roll call on this, so we'll just do it as one. So the nomination that we have is for Supervisor Mitchoff as chair and committee member Geringer as vice chair. So can you call the roll, Jackie, please?
Yes. Okay. Committee Member Thompson.
Yes.
Committee Member Burgess. Committee Member Geringer.
Aye.
Committee Member Haskew.
Yes.
Committee Member Howell.
Yes.
Committee Member Hudson.
Yes.
Committee Member Hirsch. Committee Member Craig.
Yes.
Thank you. Committee Member McCrary.
Yes.
Thank you. Committee Member McWee.
Yes.
Thank you. Committee Member Mitchoff.
Yes.
Committee Member Kamara?
Yes.
Thank you. Committee Member Toth?
Yes.
Thank you. Committee Member Levin?
Yes.
Committee Member Xavier?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, so motion passes unanimously by majority vote with committee members Burgess and committee member Hirsch absent.
Great, thank you. I'm happy to pass the virtual gavel off to Chair Mitchoff. And Chair, I sent you an email just now of the process agenda that kind of talks about who's staff doing that. But in the meantime, we can just
Okay.
let you know.
The Ethernet isn't fast enough. I do have
Okay.
the agenda up here, but I'll look. It'll give. There's the little sign right there. Thank you so much. All right, and thank you all for your support for Teresa and I. And I know we're accessible at any time, no pun intended, for you if you need to get a hold of us about anything. I know this is going to be a great group to work with. And I just want to welcome my staff member, Leah Bristol, who's on the line here. And she will be, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact her if you can't get a hold of me. Okay, item 5A is discussion on further membership. And so I would like to open the floor for you as my colleagues. Hello, Dr. Levin. Thank you for joining us. For who all others that should be on here. I think some of us self-nominated, but we know that there are others out in the community, and we don't want it too big of a group, but anybody that's nominated, just know they're going to be expected to attend meetings and dig in and get the work done. And I don't think I have to worry about any of us that know other individuals. This has been a long time coming. So use the hand raised. Debbie, I'm going to see your hand raised. I'll call on you. And then I see John Cunningham has his hand raised. Go ahead, Debbie, take yourself. There you go.
Thank you. So hi, everybody. In looking at the composition of the group, I am extremely excited, I want to say, but I do think that we could add one more human being and place and space to this committee, and that is Elaine Welch. She's the CEO of Mobility Matters, and they are the only volunteer driver program that covers the entire Contra Costa County. She's a geriatric nurse. They do disabled programs for veterans and seniors and mobility management and a variety of other things. And I think her global perspective on aging and disability and the impacts on health that happen when you cannot get where you need to go are an area of expertise that would be helpful for this body.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. John?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Mitchoff, and good afternoon, members of the task force. My name is John Cunningham. I'm a transportation planner with Contra Costa County. I'm Peter Engel's counterpart at the county, and we're jointly conducting the study. I wanted to update the task force on the membership and one empty seat that we have, just to let you know where we are on that. And that is the low income community representative. So for a bit of background, when the Board of Supervisors took up the matter of the Accessible Transportation Strategic Plan earlier in the year, one comment from the Board of Supervisors is that they wanted somebody who represented the low income community on this task force. We did not have somebody like that on the Policy Advisory Committee, the first phase of this effort. So we have been reaching out in the nonprofit and the community, and we had some promising conversations going on for quite a while, and however, they did not pan out. We have a couple of leads now on some organizations that could potentially fill that slot, but I would be happy to hear any suggestions from this group on potential organizations or individuals that could sit in this seat to represent the low income community. And that's all I had at this time.
Thank you, John. Peter, your hand's up, and Dave, you were waving. Is that your hand up too? Okay, so Peter and then Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Metcalf. I just wanted to address Debbie Toth's comment about adding another member. I think the proper since Elaine would be representing a non-governmental organization, NGO. In this case, those seats are filled. So I think the proper procedure would be that we would ask the CCTA board to reconsider the composition of the task force to add another NGO seat. So the CCTA was the one that kind of established the composition. So I think it's their role to revise that if necessary. So we'd be happy to take that item back to the authority at the next meeting. And there may be some other things that we ask the authority if the task force is interested in establishing a TAC, for instance. We'd want to get direction from the authority on that to have, kind of a staff level, more of a staff level from your staffs to be involved. So a few items we're going to be going back, this is going to be an ongoing item on the authority agenda as well. And if we have these requests, we can take those back to the authority for approval.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Dave?
Yeah, the first request, nobody else gets on this decision-making body that last name ends with H. I think we have filled the quota completely. What do we have, 4 or 5 names? I've never seen anything like that where one letter gets, especially H. Peter pretty much said what I'm saying. There's a lot of people out there that probably applied, which would concern me. And then you don't have room, and then all of a sudden at the first meeting you pick them. I think the names that we could hear if we all went around the room would be very viable. I don't have a problem if we were doing ex officio and people want to see what's going on and things like that. But speaking as someone and a couple other people that have been on some of these regional boards, you start getting up over 21 people and start trying to get through motions and things like that for direction. It can be, well, there'll be one tonight, won't there, Karen? It could get pretty darn long. I would just suggest that Peter's point of bringing ACT back to the board is probably the best way. But I would also add that you take a look if there are ex officios that people want to do it, and look at categories for people that would just be there that can speak and keep it simple. There is nothing keeping simple about asking for the low income or disadvantaged communities fact of life, and we really need to get one. The board needs to decide to put one of those on. I can tell you right now, or you will have someone put one on. It's the direction of the state. So yeah, I'm fine with take it back to CCTA. Debbie knows how to get down there and pitch. She'll do it. I only second Loella's, so you'll have to wait. But if somebody's going to add something to the group, let's listen. That's all.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands up. Am I missing anybody? Okay, so let's do this. We will take back to the CCTA board discussion for adding another NGO. And I appreciate Peter and John having done a lot of outreach to nonprofits to try and find someone to fill that low income. But I'm now going to put it on you as members. You must know somebody in your community who is civically engaged and understands how this process works. So I would ask that you get back to Peter, I'll put it on him, with your nominations of who that individual might be. And in the interim, I see people on the Zoom who aren't specifically filling a stakeholder position. We are always going to welcome input. We are going to want to know what you think. And even if you end up not having a quote unquote title of of this, that your input is valued. And we're not going to be able to do this work without other individuals who may not be stakeholders, but have valuable background experiences and information for us to move forward. Does that work for everybody right now? Head shakes? Okay, great. Thank you. Before I leave this item, and I appreciate the nominations, I think also this was the opportunity for committee members to see if there was a hole, meaning HOLE, of stakeholders that we may have left out. I know this went through a lot of iterations. I feel comfortable with the stakeholders listed. And we can take this up again at the next meeting if it comes to you all. But I know you all serve on different boards and commissions and or are staff of various transportation agencies. So I know you've all been thinking about this. So I'll leave it at there for now. All right. And I got your annotations, Peter, so thank you. Our next item is 5B. We're going to have a few slides on this. This will be an opportunity for a briefing on the plan development and implementation. And so Naomi is going to review the plan timeline and outcomes. Naomi?
Thank you.
There you are. Good morning, or good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm going to share my screen. We do have just a few slides for a few of these agenda items. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So just a little bit of recap of how we got here. Many of you were closely involved with the development of the plan, but we did want to just make sure and review for you what we did and how we got here. So we developed the Accessible Transportation Strategic Plan beginning in 2019. I put the cover of the executive summary instead of the full plan on here because I like this cover better, but they're very similar. The plan was guided with the help of two advisory committees, the Technical Advisory Committee, which first convened in November 2019, and we began our outreach in February 2020, a very loaded time. And then everything changed. And we went into shelter in place and we had to reconsider our approach. And we pivoted to online outreach. And we really focused in on that and created a toolkit and worked with our advisory committee. And then the Policy Advisory Committee was able to convene in August of last year. One of our highlights of our outreach was we had a telephone town hall in October. We completed the draft plan in January of this year and completed the final plan in March. So it was a lot of work, but we were pretty happy with the outcome. So just a few highlights on recommendations. We did include a number of things in your welcome packet. I'm getting messages, emails. Not everybody got everything that they should have. I really apologize. Let us know, the project team, and we'll get stuff to you as fast as we can. But we did include some ideas or some summaries of the recommendations that led to this implementation phase that we are in now. And those include really to establish a coordinated structure by establishing a task force. Look, we're doing it already. And then that task force will help us establish a countywide coordinated entity. So the task force was modeled on the PAC. It had similar, but I think improved representation. There are three primary goals or tasks for the task force that we laid out in the plan. Identify mobility strategies that can be delegated to existing agencies or nonprofit organizations. Basically, what can we do quickly to improve services for people? Establish the coordinated entity, and also very importantly, identify funding. That's really important to be able to do the other two. And then, as we said, the idea is to establish a countywide coordinated entity, which we are still very open. It could be an existing nonprofit, a public agency, or a new entity. And then that entity would very likely, nothing is guaranteed yet, but apply to become a coordinated transportation service agency with the MTC if appropriate. And also, we in the plan identified a number of mobility strategies that would be worked on either at this stage with the task force or in the future with a coordinated entity. Here are some examples of those. One seat ride, same day trip programs, expand volunteer driver programs, shopping trips, hospital discharge service, one call, one click, programs for veterans, fare integration, and ways that we can, I want to say, make some elements of ADA more uniform, ADA paratransit. So those are just some of our initial mobility strategies or examples thereof, and some of our outcomes from the plan. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute, and we'd be happy to take any questions about the plan development.
Okay, thank you, Naomi. Unfortunately, I was just looking at my email. I'm one that didn't get that. So I'll just let you know. And the reason I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, because this is the first time I've met you. And I'm not sure if others, this is the first time they're meeting you.
I'm very sorry. My name is Naomi Armenta, and I'm a principal planner with Nelson Nygaard. And I was the project manager for our project working with CCTA and developing the ATSP. And I'm actually still project manager now for this implementation phase.
Great. We welcome you. I thought that's what you were on the consultant team, but I just wanted to make sure we all knew. Peter, I'm going to ask for everybody's input. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quickly, I apologize, Chair Mitchoff. I should have made those introductions in the beginning. We've got our consulting team, Nelson Nygaard here, Naomi Armenta, and Richard Weiner, who both were, key team members. We've also got Alejo Alvarado, that he is also with Nelson Nygaard. And they're part of the team that's going to help John and I, get all this stuff done. So I apologize for not introducing them earlier.
No apologies necessary. We are all working fast and furious, and no harm done. But if anybody else didn't get the packet, I got the agenda, but some of these slides, because there was valuable information there, especially that last slide. So I'm going to look to my committee members if they have any comments or questions on Naomi's presentation. All right, Jackie, do we have any members of the public who've raised their hands?
Not that I see, no.
And any written comments?
No.
Okay, great. I could ask the questions now, but I'm that's the briefing, but we'll wait down to discussion on implementation process and goals. Okay, item 5C is discussion on upcoming funding, and a few more slides. And Peter and John are going to take this to talk about potential funding sources, including the countywide Measure X. Take it away, guys.
I think John's going to kick it off with the Measure X discussion.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So Measure X, for those that don't know, is a half-cent sales tax that was passed in 2020. It runs for 20 years, and it's anticipated to generate about $81 million a year. The intent of the tax is to fund essential services, including health services, emergency response functions, safety net type services, early childhood services, and then generally protecting vulnerable populations. So the funding is distributed by the Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors. set up a Measure X advisory committee who met just about every week for 3 to 4 months to develop recommendations. They heard presentations from folks requesting funding, and they developed the recommendations for the Board of Supervisors. I think we have one Measure X community member on this task force. There may be more. It was a large group, and I don't know the makeup by heart. So we do have at least one representative here. So the status of the Measure X funding is that the Board of Supervisors received the Measure X Community Advisory Board recommendations several weeks ago. And they are going to take up the matter again on November 2nd. Peter Engel and the consulting team, Naomi Armenta and Richard Weiner, we presented to the Measure X Advisory Committee our needs and what the recommendations of the Accessible Transportation Strategic Plan are. And they were fairly well received. And I see Naomi put the exact items up on your screen. And so we scored pretty well relative to all the requests, and that was in the recommendations that went to the Board of Supervisors. So we're nothing's guaranteed, but we're optimistic. So you see on the screen, we indicated what we want to fund in the short term. But we did also indicate to the advisory committee that it's this task force that is ultimately going to make the recommendations and provide direction to staff. And so what you see on the screen is sort of staff's best guess as to what we were going to recommend to the task force and for your consideration. And we did have a strategy. We wanted to fund generally 2 categories. And one, we wanted systemic improvements so that we saw significant change in a system that needs change. And so those, however, are slow to be implemented, and they do take some time. Those are more medium to longer term solutions. So we did want to fund some of those, but we also wanted to fund services where we could see the immediate impact on the ground to the population rather immediately. And so we also, that is part of our strategy as well. So if you go to the bullet points, the first one, establishment of a coordinating entity. That's one of the more medium-term systemic solutions. And that is meant to address what Chair Mitchoff sort of alluded to earlier when she mentioned that we aren't going to let this sit on the shelf any longer. We've done 3 previous similar studies, and I was using the phrase that she used. Those studies are sitting on the shelf. One of the shortcomings that we took a look at those efforts, and we found that the shortcomings is that there was no entity that was in charge of implementation. And so we took a different approach with this, and we're going to establish an entity to oversee the implementation. Now, what form that entity takes is what this task force is going to decide. It could be, any number of different solutions. Naomi mentioned earlier a consolidated transportation services agency. That is sort of a category that's can be applied to a couple of different organizations. It could be a nonprofit. It could be an existing government agency. It could be a new joint powers. It could be an existing nonprofit. So that's something that this committee is going to consider in the future. One of the other systemic improvements that we want to fund is, and it was mentioned earlier, and that is a one-call, one-click operations center. And that means if you need accessible transportation services in the county right now, depending on where you are geographically or what program you're participating in, dialysis or adult day healthcare, there's probably dozens of different numbers and websites that you would go to try and access it, and it's difficult to navigate. So what we want to establish is one phone number to call to find out or book directly your transportation services, or one website. That's the click. And so that's going to take some time to implement. So those are the longer term, medium term strategies. The more immediate things that we have planned that we want this task force to consider, the last 2 bullets, and that's user side subsidies. And that's, I think, fairly self-explanatory. We want to remove the barrier of cost for these trips for low-income population, and that's something else we want to use the funding for. And then there's an existing program that the transit operators have set up. And that's the one seat ride pilot program. That's the last bullet. And one of the most commonly identified problems with accessible transportation in this county is that if you have to take a long distance trip, it requires a transfer from one provider to another provider. And this program that the transit agencies have set up addresses that transfer issue. You know, and a transfer on accessible transit or paratransit is not like a transfer on fixed route. It's much more time consuming, and depending on the mobility of the passenger, it introduces unnecessary sort of danger, I guess, into the trip. If we can eliminate those transfers, you know, that's a good thing. And so that's one of the more immediate projects that we want to fund. And again, that's with the Measure X. That's with the Measure X funding. And so I'll stop my presentation on that funding source and project right now and see if there's any questions or comments.
I would like to quickly notate that that there's been an alternate that has arrived, Mika McFadden, for committee member Anderson.
Great, thank you. John, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yep, I think that.
Now, weren't there other funding, or it was just Measure X? I thought there were two other.
Yeah, I can give a report
Okay.
on one of the other ones, I guess, before we go into questions on that. So there's a funding source called it's a crazy name. It's TNC Access for All. A few years ago, there was a state law that went into pass that TNCs would be required to charge 10 cents per trip, and that money would go into a pot of funds that would help improve wheelchair accessible vehicles waves within the counties of where those funds are collected.
And what does TNC stand for?
Sorry, Transportation Network Company. So your Ubers and Lyfts.
Gotcha.
And so the project was assigned to the California Public Utilities Commission. And over the last several years, they've been putting together this program and the rules and regulations associated with it. And we're at a point now where the CPUC has asked for fund administrators from each county. CCTA has taken on that role to come up with a program for Contra Costa County to improve the availability of wheelchair accessible vehicles for same day service type trips, similar to what is being provided by TNCs. It's not a big pot of money. It's roughly between $250,000 and $300,000 a year. That's not going to go very far, but we do have it, and we will be coming back to the task force to help us start to establish an appropriate program on how we can use those funds.
So did we automatically get those funds, Peter? Did we have to apply for them?
Every year we submit an application to the CPUC stating that we want to be the fund administrator.
I gotcha.
And so we did that. We received the check, and now we just gotta spend it. So again, there's a lot of criteria that are still kind of in a gray area that the CPUC is making final decisions on, like who actually can get this money. Can a public bus operator get it? Does it have, what permitting do they have to get through the CPUC? All that kind of stuff is kind of still up in the air. There's also this strange little twist called an offset. And what happens if the TNCs report quarterly to the CPUC, and if they're showing progress on improving their wheelchair accessible vehicles, then they can pull some of that money back. So the money that's available to us is going to be changing, fluctuating. So it doesn't make it easy to do a program like this. The money's not big and it's going to change, but hopefully we can make some improvements. So there will be more information on this to come.
All right, thank you. All right, committee members, let's open the floor for comments. I will start just because the Board of Supervisors, we made our suggestions to county staff on the 12th of October, asking county staff to come back on November 2nd. And in the interim, our county staff was meeting individually with each supervisor to get their top 5 priorities. One of my top 5 was funding for this, for accessible transportation. And I believe my other colleagues all, during public comments on October 12th, indicated they were supportive. I don't know if in the end, they made it to their final 5, but so 2 things here. We weren't sure that county staff could get all the information, so it may be moved off to November 9th. We will keep you apprised of that when the final decision is made. And the second thing is that even with the decision made, and John touched on it a little bit, when I talked to county staff, to get the money out as quickly as possible, we wanted it to go to someone or some entity that the county already had a contract with. And that doesn't mean that somebody that we don't have a contract with could not be the entity, and we have to discuss if that's what we want. But in my thinking, I think we do need an entity that could administer this program, because John talked about services, but there is going to be some administration to doing this. And even though the decision will be made in November, getting the money out will not be, as you can imagine, the next day. So that's another conversation the board is going to have. But I am highly optimistic that we will get something. And John, if you haven't already been contacted by Lisa Driscoll, let me know, because I need $1. Now we're going to dollar amounts. Before it was programs and projects. Now we need a dollar amount. And personally, and I haven't talked with Diane about this, but I'm going to assume she would support it. I would like let's not be conservative here. If we can get by the first year on X, but we could do twice as much with, and I don't mean to refer to low hanging fruit as not as important, but things to get up and going, and we needed 2X. I want to know that 2X number. So I, as I said, I feel highly optimistic that we are going to get funding to get this program up and running. Everybody else, anybody have any comments, Dave?
Yeah, my first thought is you really didn't pick Measure X, did you? I mean, the last time we got clobbered that we did a Measure X.
We had no choice, believe me, when it came up to be Measure X. But
that's official.
Yeah. Oh, you've already voted on it, Dave. It's official.
Okay. The other thing I keep thinking is back to the importance of getting the measure through. I don't know how you're going to get it through if you don't have that low income presence. It's just so strong in West County. I would just ask John that you check in the AB 617 areas. That's what the cap and trade was doing. It's an air district thing, but it's more than air district. It's
Are you talking John Cunningham or John
Yes.
Joya?
No, I'm not talking to Joya. I'm talking to John Cunningham.
What I think he's saying, John Cunningham, is that
Yes.
you might reach out to John Joya, because
Or Tom Butt.
or Tom Butt. But if, Teresa, you represent Far East County. If there are individuals, the reason, Dave, for those of you who don't know, AB 617 has to do with providing extra resources into low-income communities that have been more strongly impacted, unfortunately, to the negative by air pollution. And so we are forming a task force there, but there's, as would be for this, there's more people interested than there are slots. So there may be John Joya, John Cunningham may have someone in mind that could fill that role. Rita, I know you represent West County also. Maybe if you would prefer to call John Joya, and let John Cunningham know that, because he doesn't need to make 2 calls, and we can go from there. But Dave's point is important. But right now, we just wanted to report out on funding sources. And the reason, unfortunately, I believe those other resources and studies ended up on the shelf was that there was no money.
Yep.
And so
And they vote there.
Yeah. And so this was one of the, in addition to mental health teams for police, this was my high priority to get funding for this so that we can do that. Okay. I'm doing a lot of talk. Debbie, go for it.
I was like, I had my hand raised before Mr. Hudson did. And if there's gonna be some rule about,
No, but you know what I'm finding, Debbie, is those of us with pale skin have pale hands and they're not easily seen.
Time for us.
I think I'm going to make mine purple from now on. Go ahead.
If you could, I would. So couple things I want to say. One is Miss Myrtle Braxton, who spoke during the Measure X, would be probably a fantastic person to have on this body. I don't know if she's low income. I guess that's something to check out. But John, we have her contact information from the Measure X process, and I'm happy to forward that along to you. She also happens to be African American or Black, which obviously is very missing from this, other than Rashida. And I don't know if anybody else is or identifies as, but I think that we're a little white.
Well, meet McFadden, but you're right. We need more diversity on this committee.
Okay. And so that's 1. 2 would be that, in looking at the numbers and what's available, first of all, Peter, $300,000 to a nonprofit organization is a ton of money. So you say it's not much money. It's a hell of a lot of money in the nonprofit world. But I know, and I could be mistaken because things could have changed since last I spoke to Rashida, but when I was talking to Rashida about this piece of the 1-seat ride and what that looks like for folks, because really, truly, for those of you, and I'm going to explain a little more, so forgive me, but I don't know that Dr. Levin or Matt White or I don't know anybody else in the room, how much experience they've had with accessible transportation or inaccessible transportation and paratransit and all that fun stuff. So I think it's sort of important to explain this, that a transfer trip literally for somebody living in Richmond and going to Pittsburgh can be a 7-hour trip. And they have to go on a shared ride that can go 10 different people from where they're starting to the next transfer point, and then they can go 10 other people to the next transfer point, and then 10 other people before their drop off. That's just one way, and that's probably 12 miles, right? So it's ridiculous for people who have incontinence, who have dementia, who have developmental disability, like all these things, right? So, but when I talked to Rashida, it was my understanding it is only the Contra Costa providers that are going to be a part of that. So when you look at that 1.4 million in funding or whatever that was, whatever was baked into that allocation of funding only considered this small. And I'm hoping that through this process, since we seem to have BART representation and East Bay paratransit representation, that they might decide that this is something that they need to participate in too. So I might say that we might have a little more money in that place so that we could invite them into this process, because I'm sure that they would want to do best by the people with disabilities and seniors that need to ride these services. So I think that's important. And I do want to elevate for the newer people who aren't in this jargon and particular conversation on a daily basis. I'm happy to see that there are some folks here who aren't the everyday people who show up at all these meetings. And I do think by having Rita, for example, somebody who gave up driving in 82, Rita, that you have the perspective of somebody who takes fixed route, who walks, who has to, coordinate with other people to get rides. Like, I think there is a good mix, and I like that there are new people to this mix that are not Rita or any of us, but I think it's important for them to understand that when we're talking about accessible strategic transportation, we're not just talking about paratransit fixed route rides. We're talking about what the need is of the individual, the need to get to church, the need to get to the grocery store, the need to get to the doctor's appointment, the need to go to the beauty salon. The fact is that in Contra Costa County, we age out of the ability to get our needs met by getting to where we need to go, whether it's nutrition, healthcare, socialization, whatever. So this is really a broad approach to finding the person's needs and developing a system around that. So I just wanted to give it that context. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Rita?
Yes, I just wanted to second Debbie's idea of Myrtle Braxton. I don't know if she's necessarily low income, but she represents a huge low income community.
Well, let me ask this question of Peter then. What is the income level to be considered low income? Is it a poverty, federal
Yeah, but
poverty?
we really don't have one. And this is a suggestion, I think, that came from Supervisor Joya when the Board of Supervisors kind of discussed this. I think the idea was that if it's not a low income person, then it's absolutely an agency who is committed to serving
Low
the
income.
low income population.
Okay.
And John has actually been the one that's kind of spearheaded this as a staff for the county. We have reached out to
I know, I recall.
several agencies, yeah.
Right.
And so
Okay.
it's just finding that one person that can commit the time is
So what I'm going to ask then, Rita, I didn't mean to interrupt you, is because I know you talk with John Joya.
Yeah.
If you would, I'm going to ask you to talk to John Joya. And, nobody wants to make a call to somebody to say, hey, are you low income? But since he was the one that had this, and I'm sure he must know Ms. Braxton, I'm hoping he would, maybe it would be somebody who represents that community. So do you mind taking on that responsibility and talking to John and seeing, and if he knows that she doesn't really meet low income, somebody else?
Okay.
Okay.
I'll talk to John. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think that would be helpful to do that. And as I said, I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I wanted Peter to be able to answer that low income question. Was there other comments you wish to make?
No, it was basically about Myrtle.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Dave Hudson was waving his hand.
Yeah, I don't have a hand footer upper on my thing here. I just want to be careful about this. There's the perception, and what we're talking about is someone from the low income community that is listened to by the low income community, not someone that just represents them. I'm reminded of the speaker we had, Karen, when we went up to see the tar sands, who came down to speak to the Air District. Very well respected within the environmental community. But when we went out to where they were actually doing the protest, they were throwing stuff at her because she talked to the police. The perception is everything on this one. We need somebody that is going to help measure X. No pass, no money. That's what we got to remember.
Yeah, and I think John Joya will be able to help us out with that. So stay tuned, November 2nd or November 9th. You're welcome to call in and voice your support for any particular program. Hint, 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 because we have a lot of people in the community who want, and Debbie served on the committee, and I think this came in number 7 out of the top 10. So it still is going to need a lift. And because there's a lot of people in the community, we have a lot of social service requests. We have a lot of requests for our undocumented community and for our unhoused community, and those are vital. But there's been a lot of resources, my position in COVID this year, to help out. And remember, Measure X money is not one-time money. This is an ongoing thing for 20 years. And so we don't need the whole ball of wax right up front, but part of the group, our work in this next year, once we get the funding, is to figure out what we'll need in following years. And some of those priorities may change. And so again, we'll make sure you know if it's November 2nd or November 9th. I'm going to ask Leah in my office to work with John and Peter to get the email list, and we'll send out an e-blast to let you know if it's the 2nd or the 9th. All right. Any other comments or questions before we move to our next item? Any public comments, Jackie, or written comments?
There was no written comments, no public comments.
Right. Thank you. Okay, 5C is, oh no, we did that. 5D, the Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force. We have one slide on that, and Richard, you're making that presentation.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Yeah, so we have 5 minutes for this, but I think it's an excellent segue from the discussion about Measure X, because as you'll see, some of the recommendations that came out of that effort and out of our study are paralleled over here in the Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force recommendations. So just to give a little bit of context, so this task force was set up in the early days of the pandemic when it became apparent very quickly that COVID was going to have a major impact on transit ridership. In June of 2021, the ridership was 67% down from the previous year. And so they were looking at different ways of trying to bring back ridership. And some of the challenges that were being faced were things as congestion started picking up again, that was impacting bus schedule adherence, a major impact on disparities, economic disparities, looking at costs and looking at some of the institutional challenges. So the task force actually came up with recommendations in 5 different areas: fares, customer information, the transit network, accessibility, and funding. And I'm just going to speak very briefly. I think there were 20 plus recommendations that came out of this. I forget the exact number, but 5 of them related to our area. And as you'll see, and it's no coincidence because people are looking at Contra Costa County because of this study that has just been completed. You are somewhat in a unique situation, especially with the existence of the one-seat ride pilot program, which many counties are clamoring to emulate, but are hesitant to take that first step. And for other reasons, there are some similarities between the recommendations that came out of the task force and ones that we produced over here as part of the study. Coincidentally, the task force also looked to the NTC's coordinated plan that Naomi and I were quite involved in producing 3 or 4 years ago. So it's not a big surprise that there are some similarities in these recommendations. But I'll just go through them quickly, the ones that are on your slide. One is designating a mobility manager, and they've got an ambitious plan for that. That would be by mid-2022. And really the goal over there is to have a designated person or entity to coordinate rides and function as a liaison between the transit agencies in each county. So, striking similarity is what we recommended with our coordinated entity in this study. Second was funding more pilot projects for one-seat paratransit rides. I think enough has been said about that. Again, the folks on the task force and their representatives are definitely looking to see how things go in Contra Costa County with that one. And that they would like to implement by late 2022, so just a year from now. ADA paratransit Clipper integration. Probably many of you know that Clipper does have the availability of discounted rides for seniors and people with disabilities on fixed route transit. What this is talking about is actually integrating it in paratransit, which has been talked about for many years and for a variety of reasons has not been implemented to date. But that one as well is a pretty ambitious goal in terms of the timing. And then key paratransit challenges, reforms, one that is not stated explicitly over here, but we will definitely need to be including in the update to the coordination plan, and that was actually included in the recommendations of the task force, would be trying to find options for same-day service, which is a perennial issue and has been for 30 years since the passage of the ADA. People want same-day options. The way ADA paratransit is set up, that's not an option. But increasingly around the country, systems are finding ways to meet those needs through a variety of measures we can talk about. And then finally, the fifth one is standardizing eligibility practices. I should say, just to be clear, the eligibility criteria for using paratransit are not going to change. Obviously, that's a federal requirement, but this is implemented in different ways around the country. And certainly within the Bay Area, it's astonishing what a variety there is from paper applications to phone interviews to in-person assessments. It's all across the board. And there's been talk about trying to reform that whole process and make it more universal so that there's some consistency which makes it more equitable for people across the region. And that, as was mentioned earlier, was also one of the recommendations that we're going to be tackling as part of this task force. So given the similarities between some of these recommendations, and we're not going to be waiting for the coordinated plan or for those task force recommendations to be implemented. As was stated earlier, we're going to be looking at the so-called low-hanging fruit within the coming months. But there is going to be a lot of attention being paid on what happens in Contra Costa County and how effective we are at starting to implement some of these recommendations. And that's all I'll say for now, because I want to make sure that we have enough time for the open discussion that will follow this. But I'll hand it back to you, Chair Mitchell.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments, colleagues? We're way too quiet of a group here, but Debbie's hand is up. I'm going to, I'm the kind of
Great
person
chairmanship.
like a teacher, I start calling on people. All right, Debbie, go ahead.
A couple things. Thank you. I don't think a single one of those 5 points was not included in the last 3 decades of studies on accessible transportation. This is disappointing at best to see that this is what is transformational at this point, just because it's been 3 decades of the same thing. I don't have a whole lot of faith in that implementation of all of those things. They have been in the Bay Area Coordinated Transportation Plan for at least the last 3 cycles, and I haven't seen any movement on any of those. And I'm just speaking truth to reality here, guys. So I bring all this up because this group, if we don't implement and do something and take action and not just sit in a room and talk about it, it's going to be just like this 3 decades from now. The Americans with Disabilities Act created paratransit and created legislation around the rights of people who qualify for it, who are functionally unable to take fixed route, but it does not include what the rights are of just general people who lose their mobility, their function, their sight, their hearing, their whatever. And we can't just formulate our conversations around the ADA. That is just one piece of the puzzle. And might I add that that's a 30-year-old floor that was created, not a ceiling. And if we continue to look at ADA like it's the ceiling of what we have to do and not the floor of what should be done, then we're wrong as a society. So I just think it's important to ground ourselves in those points. Thank you.
Other comments or questions, Dave?
Well, I'm a little bit more positive than that. I think the big key here is, planning's a wonderful thing, but and you have to do it, but you got to get the money. And I think that's the big difference, Karen, when you start pushing to put this thing at the highest priority for the money that's coming in. Once you do that, the opportunity opens itself up for matching funds. And then you become pilot programs, and then you work and people copy you, and we could do it. Unfortunately, I have to agree with, no, I'm not going to. Debbie's wrong, I'm right. Everything's going to be rosy from this point forward because we're going to make it happen. But remind us if it starts to go south, Debbie.
Okay, Nicole and then Rashida. Nicole, hi.
Hello. I just want to say, I noticed that I have the same colored hand as Debbie in our raised hand. So I think it's interesting.
But you have a darker wall behind you. Debbie's, hers shows up in a window. So
there you go. Okay.
I've learned so much with Zoom. Things that are not even important, but impact how we do business. All right, go ahead, Nicole.
I think I'm somewhere in between Debbie and Dave. And that I think what feels challenging for me to conceptualize is when I keep hearing the call for additional funding, I would like to see examples of what that has been in other communities, not an amorphous, the money is going to fall from the sky, but specific examples of who is funding this kind of work and how that has worked in other communities. So in order for me to be like, yes, I can believe that's going to happen, I need some hardcore examples. I think to maybe additionally to Debbie's point is what I would like to see is if we were to have all of those things, how we anticipate that impacting a specific rider. So if we had a rider who experienced mild cognitive impairment and incontinence, how those things would actually make their difference in their day and what a ride would actually look like. Because we know what it is now. We know it's not great or terrible, depending on who you talk to. And yet we're saying these will help fix that, but I haven't seen it actually played out into an example of how that would actually impact those individual riders we're talking about. So I want to see clear examples and really clear, like definitive, this is who's funding this work and this is what that could mean for our community, and a really clear example of how a ride would change for someone.
And I will comment, I saw John taking notes. I'm not sure there's a lot of programs out there, but to the extent there are, yes, I don't want to replicate or reinvent the wheel, but we may be the pilot. And I think that helps us get more money on the way. So Carol McCrary, please go ahead.
Unmute. Yes.
And your hand's very clear. You're at the aquarium today, I see.
No, this is the Great Barrier Reef in Australia.
Oh, that's
that's where I'd like to be. I'm Carol McCrary from Vistability, formerly Contra Costa ARC, and a few of you know me. I've been in some other planning meetings with Debbie and others. I've worked with Rashida so successfully. I love working with you, Rashida. And I know you have implemented the one seat, one ride, getting our regional center clients back in-person services a little bit so far. And that's really working out. The somebody coming from Antioch, if you want specifics, is on one bus on Tri-Delta all the way to Concord and goes all the way from Concord back home to Antioch on Rashida's County Connection accessible transportation. It's a person with autism. If he has to wait a half an hour even at North Concord BART for his second ride, he's getting in trouble. He's going off campus. He's getting into people's things. He's trying to break into the clerk's office, and having him go somewhere public and wait is not a good thing, and gets him kicked off of buses. So that is working out. Many of these bullet points that I've seen today are very familiar from previous plans and previous planning meetings I've been in. I think you're right, Debbie, taking it beyond the ADA. I'm thinking about the one click or one call and the eligibility piece. I serve Richmond area, Central County, and East County. And some people easily get on accessible transportation. Some people can't, for some reason, can't qualify. And it seems ridiculous to me. It should be an equitable qualification system, an equitable application system. I think my main point is implementation of this is exciting for me. I want to be hopeful, and I want to be a part of this. And thank you for all the work, the hard work that's done so far from many of you. And I'm going to stop for now, but I'll have other examples as you feel like you need them.
Thank you. And John, before I call on you, Rashida, I thought I saw your hand up, and did I forget to call on you? Or I don't see a hand up, but I wanted to give you an opportunity if I messed up.
Yeah, so actually I wanted to kind of bridge what maybe three people have said now. One, what Debbie said about using our paratransit, even though it's 30 years old, as a foundation, but it certainly does not fulfill the needs. It fills one very specific need. And frankly, the fact that we've recognized all these other needs and are trying to push these needs into paratransit, frankly, I think is what makes that's what gives paratransit a bad name. So pilots, we've done studies up the wazoo. They were talking about studies, the MTC slides that came up there. Pilots are what bring studies to life. When we think about this ATS plan, there are about 21 different strategies, transportation strategies that are in there. And it's so funny because being coming from an operational background, trying to implement all of them is like trying to eat an elephant whole. And so pilots, chopping up these funds, I'll give you as an example. We've talked a lot about the one seat, but let's talk about those individuals that find it difficult, or even they're ADA qualified, but even the way ADA is set up, paratransit is set up, makes it a little bit difficult even for them to have that type of service. Debbie and I have a pilot project that is, COVID is the one that's kind of prevented it from happening, where we use a TNC company. And it's not just a TNC like a taxi that's just a little bit detached, but we use a TNC company that's Silveride, and it's a door-through-door type of TNC, a different type of TNC that has a little bit more hand-holding, a lot more training associated with them. They also have the drug and alcohol background component to it that is very necessary, if you ask me. And so that type of a TNC, when we're talking about even a more vulnerable type of individual in our population, can be added to it. So I guess what I'm saying is that as we start picking these different strategies to bring them to life, I would like to see the task force and the coordinated entity start looking at the existing functions that are already there to see how you can bridge those functions, fund the existing functions with pilot projects in order to bring some of these strategies to life.
Okay. John and then Margie.
Really quickly, I wanted to address Member Howell's comments earlier regarding funding. I think she forecasted a future staff report from the team, and that there are models out there for different types of funding mechanisms, and that's something that we are planning on bringing to the committee for your consideration. You know, this mechanism has worked here for that purpose, this different mechanism over here, and so there are models out there that we can try and replicate, and we can bring to this committee for consideration.
Thank you, John. Margie and then Jeannie.
Hi, I'm Margie McQuee, and I'm one of the just general stakeholders that is part of the committee representing people with disabilities. And I would just say I'm one with pan disabilities or intersecting disabilities. And one of the things that I think is important to recognize is that there are a lot of people such as myself who are not necessarily represented by agencies such as Debbie's or the developmental disabled population. And it's easy for us to get overlooked in thinking categorically like it's all got to be paratransit or you got to do fixed route or whatever. And as Debbie enumerated, there are a number of destinations that one needs to get to in the county. And if you're disabled and for whatever reason you can't drive, getting there is very difficult, regardless of whether you're going to go on paratransit because you qualify, or maybe you're kind of just a little not quite qualified and now you've tried to figure out how to get there. And so I'd like us to be mindful of these other strategies that came up and think about, what if somebody isn't part of an agency where they've got people looking out for them? How do they access transportation and get across the county? Because they're the ones that probably are struggling the most and don't have a way of even figuring out how to express those frustrations.
Thank you, Margie. Jeannie?
I wanted to make a couple of points. I want to add to what Rashida said. I'm also a big fan of pilot programs. That's a good way to open a door to get a little bit of funding to show how we could be successful at doing some of the things we're talking about. I always appreciate what Debbie says about the ADA. That's what I've thought since it was first passed 30 some odd years ago, or however long it's been. We need to view that as the floor and not our ceiling. And the third point I'd like to make is we're talking to ourselves, we're talking amongst ourselves. And I can't tell you the number of times in our community that people have come to me and they have absolutely no idea where to go. So it's super important that we get in the community and talk to the individuals who we can most help in whatever program we come up with. But there's a lot of people out there who absolutely do not know. They don't know about Debbie's program. They don't know about my program. They don't know about, they don't even know where to go. And I don't know what the answer to it is. There's, no more newspapers. Who watches TV anymore? I mean, it's difficult to get the word out. And that's one of the things that we really need to focus on, is how to reach the people that really need the help.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to wrap this part up unless anybody else wants to speak. What I'm hearing is we obviously want whatever money comes in to be leveraged to bring in more money. We want to see programs that are working in other parts of the state or other parts of the nation so that we can consider them. And we need a communication strategy, sounds like. So I'm going to suggest that you all might think about this committee as sort of what the Measure X committee was modeled on, which is all these different things that we want to think about, that we get more informed on them, and then we prioritize based on the money that will be coming in. What are maybe the top 3 or 4? Doesn't mean we can't do other things, but so that we have a focus and can start some implementation. And Jeannie, I appreciated your comments, and Margie, because you're right. If you don't know where to go, it's very frustrating, and some people have research skills and others don't. And as the child of an aging parent, I was lucky to be in my current position and my many years working for the county to know sort of where to go, but I had to rely on others on this committee for their expertise. So I can only imagine the average individual out there who is now needing to take advantage or access these services and not. And Margie, thank you for bringing that up. That's why you're on here. We want you. You're supposed to do this when something. So be thinking about, maybe that is the pilot program. We build on paratransit. We build on whatever, but the one click, one call, one click. Do we have a call center? I know we have 2 more discussion items, but I'm trying to reflect what I'm hearing from everybody here. And of course, I still invite other comments as we go along and during this, because we're going to need, our last thing is to give direction to staff about what we want them to come back for our next meeting. So we're going to move on unless anybody has any comments on that. Not seeing anything. Thank you for the commenters. 5E, discussion on implementation process and goals. And Richard, you're going to lead us on this also.
Yeah, well, in a sense, if I understand correctly, we only have 5 minutes or a little less, right? The meeting ends at 3:30.
Well, I have to leave at 4. I chair another meeting, so I'm happy to go a little longer. And I know I just wanted people to comment. So
Yeah. I actually thought, if you wouldn't mind, I think a good segue into that is, I think Debbie brought up a really important point over here. And, if I take a step back and I look at those 5 things that came out of the task force, 4 out of 5 indeed are all about paratransit. And I wanted to make a distinction between what came out of our study, which went way beyond paratransit, and what came out of these Blue Ribbon Task Force recommendations. So we totally get the point that Debbie's making, that, while there are issues with paratransit and funding needs to be, can help address some of them, we're not just looking at paratransit ridership as part of the study and the recommendation that would come out of it. So, for example, one of our short-term recommendations was for a user-side subsidies. That wasn't just to have low-income subsidies for paratransit riders. It was looking beyond that at all transportation options in the county and which ones would lend themselves to some kind of subsidy. So I just want to make clear that even though we talked about the Blue Ribbon Task Force because it is what's happening in the region and it's a really critical development, we're not seeing the study as being limited in that way. So thank you for pointing that out. So just to frame this next part as much time as we do have, really what we were intending over here was to ask you what, and we've started this discussion, frankly, we've already gotten partway through this discussion, but what your hope and vision is for this study, for this task force, and what should come out of the task force, and how do you think this could be achieved? So it's very high level, and as I say, many of the comments that we've heard already really were part of this discussion, even though we didn't have a formal transition of agenda items. But if anybody would like to speak to those, your hopes and your visions for this task force's outcomes.
I'm not seeing any hands. So what I'd like to do is blend that with the next item, which is next steps. And so I'm going to look to you all. Teresa, what do you think are some next steps that we need to do here?
Well, I think you summarized them, and I agree, Richard. Thank you to everyone who jumped into, and especially the people who have been working in this space, and Margie for speaking on behalf of the consumer, the end users, on what the needs are. I liked one of the goals that I saw. Oh, and Chair Mitchell, for summarizing, what you heard out of that and some ideas for next steps. The part where Rashida touched on existing programs, and I think Jeannie did. I mean, definitely, if you don't know what's going on, then you don't know where to go, the communications. But I think for me, as a task force member, having a staff report that shows what existing programs are there that could potentially be wrapped into pilot programs. I think the way that staff presented it to us, or the recommendations, were mobility strategies that can be delegated to existing agencies or nonprofit organizations for short-term implementation. Having that list of what those are. And are there things that we can do on that? Just for that part where Measure X did it, having people come and talk to them, having either staff or other members of the task force come back with what programs are already out there, and where could we begin fulfilling some of those short-term beyond the pilot program for the one seat, one ride part of that.
Okay. John, I knew, and Peter, you've been taking notes, and Naomi and your staff, I'm sure you have been too. How big of a lift is coming back? Well, let me back up. Okay, committee members, do we want to meet monthly, or do we want to meet every other month? We can change that. I want to give staff enough time to come back with the information we've been asking for. And I know they're well versed in these programs, because John talks to me and Peter talks to me and others in the transportation authority about, well, here's a great idea, or they're doing this there. So it isn't that you're not aware of it, but I also want to give you enough time with your other responsibilities to give us a staff report that really gives us information. And if you need till the middle of December, I'm happy, if you need 60 days to do that, I need you to be honest with me and let me know. So we won't have a meeting in November. On the other hand, and November's a funny one, because we're on a third Tuesday or Thursday. So we could do a third Thursday in November and not worry about Thanksgiving before those holidays come in. But John, Peter, what are your thoughts? Naomi, too?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think we had discussed this a little bit as a planning team. And I think my vision was we kind of have an agenda. We knew we wouldn't be able to get through. I mean, a lot of folks here are new, and a lot of these terms are new to them. And what the ADA is and what it isn't are new to a lot of folks here. And there's a lot of nuances. So I think we had planned, and we haven't talked to the presenters about this yet, Rashida, but I think our initial thought was to have a meeting in a month and kind of give you the second half of all this introductory stuff. Maybe have Rashida do a presentation on the one seat ride pilot that she's doing, and kind of give us those nuances of how that works. There's also a study that was done by CalSTA. I think they assigned it to Caltrans, that looked at access. It looked at ADA. Here again, we go with the ADA, but it looked at kind of how can people access ADA services, and it's where is the application? How do you get, is it online? Do you have to call? Do you have to, and it was interesting to kind of learn from that. So there's a few things that I think might help the task force kind of get a better picture of some of these.
So you see our next meeting as being educational, I'll call it.
Educational, yeah.
Maybe 2 or 3 presentations on current programs.
Yep.
And maybe a glossary of, I know what ADA stands for and I see it in operation, but hearing from those of you who are really involved in it saying what it does and what it doesn't, and I'm not sure you need to make a presentation, but maybe just a cheat sheet of something like that. So I'm looking at the calendar, and the third Thursday in November is November 18th. Does this time frame work to give or take 3:34 for most people? It does. Okay, good. Then let's schedule, and I'm supposed to have a 4 o'clock with Tim Hale. So if we run a little late, Tim will be in the wings there. So let's do Thursday. Does that work for Peter and John?
Yeah.
I know that. Okay. All righty. So our next meeting will be Thursday, November 18th from 2 to 4. We don't have to go to 4 if the presentations, and I appreciate staff has given me a time frame, and I know Richard was watching it, and I appreciate that. But these are some good conversations we're going to need to have, and we need some of us, me, needs to be a little better educated as we move forward. And that will give you, Peter and John and Naomi, time to, we won't look to November to have some of those concepts or what's working in other parts of the state and our country. Debbie, just a sec. And we will know what's going on with Measure X. Debbie.
Yep.
Thank you. We need to do implementation stuff and not just presentations at these meetings. So given the fact that we've had 3 decades of this sort of, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do, I would recommend that we have something that we do that's action and implementation oriented and presentation and education oriented, so that we're not just buying more time. The
problem, Debbie, is in talking to county staff, not John, but fiscally, we are not going to be able to get any money out the door earliest April 1st. So what I think is if we do that, maybe in December and or January, we can come back and do our top 3 what we want to do implementation wise. And if you want to make a presentation on what you think that should be, let's do that. But with my fiscal hat on and having talked to county fiscal staff, there is just no way there will be any money getting out before April 1. And because of our RFP process, it's probably, we can waive it. The board can waive certain things, but it will probably go to already established departments who can then contract with CBOs or with a CBO that we already have a contract with.
Right.
And one of the things we have got to talk about is, the first year can look like this, but the second year, I've heard from people, we don't want it fragmented into different, we want a hub.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, Karen, but I just want to say, we don't have to wait for Measure X funding. I'm just going to push back on that with love.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
The half-cent, no. The half-cent sales tax prior to Measure X, which is Measure J, is supposed to have a ton of money for senior and disabled transportation that goes above and beyond the ADA. I wrote that language in there. I know it's in there. And I know that we have reserves. And I know that we've hired somebody to be a full-time Momentum person, but we haven't hired somebody to be a full-time accessible transportation person. Like, I think there's money there that can be tapped into.
Then I need you to make a presentation, and or Tim or somebody, to this group so they get up to speed on that, because Debbie brings up a very good point. I've assumed we have no money and that Measure X was the only money. But Measure J is the transportation half-cent sales tax. And so Peter, you know, if there's money there and what we can do with that, we get to give that recommendation to the CCTA Authority Board. So thank you for bringing that. So it isn't just Measure X money. And if there are other pots out there that all of you are aware of, let's, you know, see how we can do that. But I just want to be real clear, Measure X dollars, which are going to be, in my opinion, the major funding source to getting this group up and going, we're going to have to wait a while. But so I'll leave it, if any of you, Debbie and or others, wish to have a program presented either November or December, talk with Peter and or John, and we will do that, because I think it's important to educate us on what programs are out there that are working. And from my perspective, Measure X dollars are to build capacity, not the only thing, but they're to go, you know, if you had a little bit more money, then you'd qualify for this grant, or you could serve this many more people. And, you know, trying to talk to about an individual, looking at a you know, maybe 10 different types of examples. I'm thinking of the individual who's in a horrific accident and now is in recovery, but can't drive and still has a broken arm or broken leg. They're not old, they're not ADA qualified, I'm going to assume, and it's short term, but they need to get to medical appointments. And that's just one kind of person. The autistic person, I thought it was very interesting to hear about, because, you know, there's another type of individual that we need to develop services for the autistic community where they're a higher level priority, where if there's only X many slots of the driver stays with you. I don't know. You guys are the experts. I'm just listening to all this and hearing those kind of things. And that's a new kind of thing. So, all right, everybody. Peter, John, Naomi, did you have any closing comments?
Nothing from me. Thank you.
Okay. Is the direction I've given to staff, is that acceptable? I don't want to be that much in charge, folks, because I can take it and run with it, but, you know, we're all equal members here.
Let me ask Rashida, would you be able at the next meeting in November to give a kind of an overview of the one seat ride and kind of the pros and the cons of that you, and when I say cons, I'm assuming there's, you know, some cost factors and stuff that need to be addressed, but.
A couple of things. No, I don't mind giving a presentation, but I did want to say about implementation. So one of the things that we're supposed to be doing is trying to figure out this coordinated entity. And I think that even though that funds may not be released for a few more months, I think that there's a lot that we can do moving towards implementation, where there's less presentation, because there might just be one or two programs out there where we've shifted. But when we take a look at some of the strategies that we have, just a coordinated entity, I would think that we have an idea, a rough idea. We've said either a public agency or a nonprofit agency, so we kind of have a rough idea. So I think we need to kind of now take a look at what would it take to develop a coordinated entity. What do you need? Do you need a building? Do you need 15 staff? Do you need a phone system? Do you need a software? What is this coordinated entity? What does it actually require? I would think that we would need to look at just the demographics of Contra Costa County. We need to look at all the transit agencies that are actually in existence, how much is actually flowing and how much is actually not flowing. And then be able to determine whether or not this coordinated entity, how big or small it needs to be, to determine whether or not which direction it's going to go. And I think that that's one of the biggest elephants, because it's a nice word in a paragraph, but it does require a big lift. Let's take, for example, the one call, one click. When we think about the one call, one click, establishing a phone number, establishing how many individuals may actually call it, establishing outreach to put that phone number out there, whether it's paper outreach, whether it's a website, whether it's all the agencies that are out there now that are going to be handing a flyer out and say, this is the phone number that you call. Well, where is that phone call going to? Which is the entity that's actually going to accept that phone call? Who are the people that are going to be trained in order to answer that phone call? So when I think about the coordinated entity, I think that we still have a lot of heavy lifting to do. And it's also one of the biggest, it's the body that's going to drive this. This task force is what's putting it together, but the coordinated entity is what we've kind of said is going to drive the big plan. So if each meeting, a portion of what it's going to take to put that coordinated entity together is addressed, I think will help to move us physically forward towards implementation.
Well, my thought was that we'd have a subcommittee of those such as you who really know. And I also don't see us going from 0 to 100 right away. We may have to partner with a current CBO that serves this population or a segment of it, and what it would look like if we set it up in the next 6 months and what we want it to look like in a year. Those are just my thoughts, because I don't think I would like to implement something and have sort of a central thing, but that's Karen Mitchoff's thought, and there's a whole bunch of other ones here. But why don't those of you who know what could be implemented in the very near future, let's say within 90 days, if you had money, what could you do? Why don't you give that list to John and Peter? And then Rashida, would you mind chairing a subcommittee on what we would think of as what we want this entity to look like? Or would you rather have the whole committee discuss it? You're on mute.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Still doing mute thing. That's a good question.
Well, why don't you think about it for the next month? And John's got his hand up because I'm happy to sit on that committee too, because I think we can get money out to a current CBO that can house that under their umbrella sooner. And my hope is that the program grows so much that it will need a standalone CBO. But in the short term, that's what I see. I'm seeing you shake your head. Yes. So maybe what does it look like if we implement 3 things in the next 6 months? And one of the 4th implementation is we need some money set aside to work and figure out which CBO we can work with that's already existing. John, you've got your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Mitchoff. I just wanted to respond to Member Kamara's characterization of the magnitude of what we're talking about here, and it's absolutely accurate. It's a significant undertaking, and staff didn't take it lightly when we made that recommendation, a new coordinated entity. It is a political, financial, organizational, and operationally complex proposal. So I guess my suggestion is that staff takes their time and puts together sort of an overview and a presentation of the different models that are out there. And then after we make the larger presentation, we form a subcommittee to then take all those models out and drill down to the local level with the folks that do have operational experience and like I said, drill down.
How about this? The first hour, let's do 3 presentations, 20 minutes each. And then the last hour or less, we get the staff report on that and what the group, what each of you that bring to this body think are your 3 highest implementations and where there's dollars already that could be grabbed to do it. Is that too big of an ask? Okay, Debbie's shaking her head no. Nicole's shaking her head, yes, but I'm assuming that, okay, she's in, okay. So does that give staff enough direction for our meeting on November 18th?
Yes.
And does the committee agree with those directions? I saw Teresa, okay. All right, well, with that, thank you all. I know you're all very busy in your own I hate every day because our days are no longer normal. But anyway, I do appreciate that. And I see myself as sort of steering the boat kind of person. You're the ones with the ideas and the knowledge of what that is. And I just want to keep us on track so that we can get stuff done. All righty. Thank you, Debbie, for the heart. And wish me and Dave Hudson luck. We are meeting jointly with MTC tonight about the lovely things you've been reading about called RENA, the Regional Housing Needs. And I have an all-day meeting tomorrow where we hear these appeals. But, you know, I'm not going to be around in 2050. So it's the youngins who are going to have to live with it. But there are some great concepts. And there was an article in the paper over the weekend, if any of you are interested in that. But we all have so many things. Housing is a big deal for a lot of the population we serve in this environment. So anyway, I'm going to be on Zoom till about 10 tonight, but that's okay.
Good luck.
Well,
Bye.
this is soda, but sometimes it changes as the clock turns. Cocktail hour.
Good.
Anyway, thanks again, gentlemen and ladies. Nice to see
Thank
you all.
you.
Take
Are we
care.
adjourning the meeting?
Yes, we're adjourning. Oh. I'm so sorry, Jackie. Have
No
we
worries.
any public comment and or written in things?
No, there is not.
I didn't think so. Unfortunately, that's part of the problem. Somebody mentioned it earlier. We're talking to the choir and we need that. We need the whole church. All right. Thank you.
Thank
Have a good
you.
afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Meeting adjourned, 3:47. Thank you.